I have judged warriors for 240 years. I have stood in the trial halls of the Vael'Korun and watched 1,000 species walk in proud and walk out broken. I have seen creatures that could shatter stone with a thought. I have seen things with 12 arms and no fear in any of their eyes. I once watched a being made of living fire, a creature that had burned its way across 3 star systems and bowed to no one, kneel on my floor and weep like a child when it failed. And I am telling you, on whatever honor I have left, that I have never been as wrong about anything as I was about the humans. My name is Orstau. I was first adjudicator of the trials. Hold on to that word. I'll come back to why it matters, and when I do, you'll understand the whole shape of this. But first you have to understand what the trials were. You have to understand why we believed, every one of us, without a single doubt in 10,000 years, that they could not be cheated, could not be tricked, and could not, under any circumstances, be survived by a species as soft and small and young as the one that came down out of the iron clouds that gray morning. We were so sure. I want you to sit with that before I tell you anything else. Not arrogant, sure. The way you're sure the ground will hold your weight when you step. The way you're sure the sun will come up. That kind of sure. The kind you don't even know you're carrying until the day it betrays you. That's the part that still keeps me awake. Not that we were cruel, though we were, that we were so sure. Let me set it for you the way it was that day, slowly, the way it deserves. The trial halls sit on a world called Majishtar, a hard, gray planet that orbits a dying red star, and it was chosen 10,000 years ago for one reason. It is miserable. Deliberately, perfectly miserable. Nothing grows there. Nothing wants to. The wind comes screaming off the rock plains carrying grit fine enough to scour the paint off a hull, and it never stops. Not for an hour. Not for a heartbeat, day and night, year into year. A low, endless moan that gets down into your bones and takes up residence there and never leaves. After enough years on Majishtar, you stop hearing it the way you stop hearing your own pulse. And then some quiet moment it comes back to you all at once, and you realize it was never gone. It was inside you the whole time, the sound of a world that hates the living. The air is thin. It's cold. It tastes of iron and old dust, and it sits wrong in the lungs of nearly every species that breathes it, which is exactly why we chose it. A trial, we believed, should begin the moment you step off your ship. The planet itself is the first test. Many delegations, proud ones, mighty ones, war hosts that had crossed half the galaxy to prove themselves, fail Majishtar before they ever reach my door. They stagger out of their landers gasping, weeping grit, and they look up at that swollen red sun and that endless gray, and something in them quietly gives up before a single trial has begun. We watch for that too. The planet told us things about a species that the trials never could. The halls themselves are enormous, and older than most of the civilizations that come to be judged in them. Black stone, quarried from the bones of the planet, fitted together so finely that 10,000 years of that scouring wind has never found a seam to widen. The whole place is lit by the cold blue glow of containment fields, and those fields hum, a deep, deep sound lower than hearing, that you feel in your teeth and your back teeth and the small bones of your skull, towering arches built for giants. Floors worn smooth and faintly hollowed by 10,000 years of feet, clawed feet, hooved feet, taloned and webbed and chitinous feet, feet of every shape the galaxy has ever grown and sent here to be measured. And lining the walls always, the witnesses. The Vael'Korun warrior castes, the strongest beings in known space, draped in their dark battle armor, motionless, silent. They do not cheer. They do not jeer. They do not whisper to one another or shift their weight or look away. They simply watch, rows of them, hundreds of them, still as the black stone itself. And I promise you there is nothing in the galaxy more unnerving than to walk into that hall small and alone, and feel hundreds of the strongest creatures alive turn their eyes on you and say nothing at all. Crowds that scream can be defied. You can get angry at a crowd that screams. You cannot get angry at silence. Silence just waits for you to break. Now you have to understand what the Vael'Korun are, because the humans didn't, and that misunderstanding is the whole of this story. So let me be plain. We are not some species you have heard of in passing. We are the ones every other species has heard of and feared. For 10,000 years we have been the measure against which all strength is judged in this galaxy. Our warriors stand 3 times the height of a human and twice the breadth. Our skin turns blades, turns them, blunts them, the way stone blunts a falling raindrop. Our hearts beat slow and sure, and they keep beating through wounds that would empty another creature onto the floor in 3 breaths. When a young species claws its way up into the stars and looks around at the dark and the powers that move in it, they do not negotiate with the galaxy. They cannot. The galaxy does not negotiate with the young. Instead, they come to us. They submit to the trials. And I decide whether they are worthy to be counted among the real powers of the galaxy, or whether they remain forever beneath notice. Clients, servants, cattle, things to be used by the strong and discarded. That was the system. It had stood 10,000 years without a crack. It was, we believed, and I believed it most of all, I who sat at the top of it, simply the natural order of things. The strong test the weak accept their place. The galaxy turns. It had always been so. It would always be so. The humans came to be tested on a gray morning with the wind howling, and I remember exactly what I thought when I first saw their ship come down through the iron clouds. Small, ugly, scorched along one flank, dropping too fast the way a thing drops when its pilot is too tired to be gentle. This will be quick, I thought. I was right. It was quick. It just wasn't quick in the way I meant. Nothing about that day was anything in the way I meant. There were 3 of them. 3. I need you to understand how that landed in that hall on that morning. Other species send champions by the 100, by the 1,000. Whole war hosts cross the galaxy to stand in that cold blue light, the mightiest of their kind, armored, painted for war, roaring their species' battle songs as they march through the great doors so that the sound fills the hall and rolls back off the arches. They come in numbers because numbers are a statement. Look how many of us are this strong. Look how seriously we take you. The humans sent 3, and a small, ugly ship, and I remember the witnesses along the walls shifting just slightly, a ripple of dark armor running down the rows like wind across grass, because it looked like an insult, like the humans hadn't understood where they were or what they'd come to face. Like they thought so little of the trials, of the Vael'Korun, of 10,000 years, that they couldn't be bothered to send a real delegation. I had exactly the same thought. They don't understand. They've sent 3 tired creatures to die in front of us and they don't even know it. I was wrong about that too. I was wrong about nearly everything that day, and I have had 100 years to count the ways. They came through the great doors with the screaming wind at their backs, and the doors boomed shut behind them, that enormous sound that has made stronger creatures than humans flinch, the sound of the only way out sealing itself away. And the 3 of them stood there in the cold blue light, dust still blowing off their shoulders, and they looked up at arches built for giants. Up at walls lined with the strongest beings in the galaxy, hundreds of dark, unmoving shapes. Up at me, on the high adjudicator seat. And they did not flinch, not one of them, not even a little. I want to describe them properly, because everyone always asks what they looked like, and the answer surprises people every time. They looked tired. That's the first thing, the thing the briefings never prepare you for. Not afraid. Tired. The deep, settled tiredness of a creature that has already come a very long way and has fully made up its mind to go further still, no matter what it costs. 2 of them were what they'd later tell me their kind called soldiers, younger, harder, standing with the loose readiness of bodies that have learned to fight. 1 broad and quiet with steady hands. 1 smaller and watchful, with eyes that never stopped moving over the room. And the 3rd, the one in front, the one who would speak for them, was older, scarred down one whole side of the face, an old wound long healed into pale ridges. She walked with a faint hitch in her stride, a favoring of one leg, the kind of thing a body does forever when something broke once and set wrong. Small, all three of them by our measure. The tallest of them barely reached my chest, and I am not large for a Vael'Korun. The old one stepped forward, out ahead of the other two. She looked up at me on the seat, held my eyes, which almost no creature does. The instinct in nearly everything alive is to look away from a Vael'Korun, and the strength of that instinct is something we have always quietly counted on. She did not look away, and she spoke, through a translator band at her throat that took her rough, low words and turned them into the smooth, high speech of the Vael'Korun. "We're here for the trials," she said. "We were told we have to pass them, so let's get on with it." A sound moved through the hall. You have to understand from the Vael'Korun that quiet ripple, that low collective stir, is the equivalent of a roar of disbelieving laughter. Let's get on with it, as though the trials were a chore. As though 10,000 years of the galaxy's most feared institution, the gauntlet that every power in known space had bled to pass, were a line at a provisioning depot that she was impatient to get through. I leaned forward on my seat. I let the cold blue light catch the planes of my face, an old trick, a way of reminding the small and the proud exactly what they were standing in front of. "You understand what you face, human." "We were briefed," she said, flat, even, not a tremor in it. "3 trials, strength, endurance, will. Fail one and you're done, the whole delegation finished. Your people decide what our whole species is worth based on how the 3 of us do." She made a small movement with her shoulders, an up and down thing I didn't yet have a name for and would later learn humans call a shrug. "We read the rules on the way in. We've got it." "And you sent 3. "We sent who we could spare." She held my gaze without effort. "You want to test us, Adjudicator, then test us. We didn't come all this way to talk." I should have heard it then. I have gone over that exchange 10,000 times since, and I can hear it now so clearly it aches. The thing that was underneath her words, the thing I was too sure of myself to catch. We didn't come all this way, as though they had already paid some terrible price simply to be standing in my hall. As though the trials were not the hard part of their journey. As though, to them, my weight and my deep field and my ancient cruelties were the easy part. The part that came after the part that had already nearly destroyed them. I didn't hear it. I heard arrogance. I heard a small, soft creature who didn't understand her place, and I decided, the way I had decided 1,000 times before, with 1,000 proud young species, that I would break that arrogance out of her here, in front of everyone, and send what was left of it home to teach the rest of her kind some humility. "Then we begin," I said, "with the trial of strength." The trial of strength is the first trial because it is the simplest, and because it ends most delegations before pride can do any further damage to them. It is, in a way, a mercy. It breaks the proud quickly, before they can break themselves slowly. In the center of the hall stands the weight. It is a thing of old Vael'Korun making, older than the halls themselves, some say, though I don't know if that's true. A column of compressed neutron-forged metal, taller than a human, suspended at rest in a containment field, dull and gray and utterly unremarkable to look at. And it is the cruelest thing we have ever built, and we have built cruel things. There is a trick to the weight that the young never grasp until it is far too late. It reads the strength of whoever lifts it, measures them, in the instant of contact, and then it adjusts. It grows heavier. Always heavier than you can bear, always staying just past your limit, so that to hold it at all is to feel yourself slowly, certainly, being crushed into the floor by your own best effort. The stronger you are, the harder it pushes back. It cannot be out-muscled. That is the entire point. It was designed 10,000 years ago by minds that wanted a test no amount of raw power could ever pass, and they succeeded perfectly. The trial is not to lift it. Anyone can lift it for a heartbeat too, before it reads them and begins to climb. The trial is to hold it. to carry it across the hall, from the lifting stone to the setting stone, 30 paces, no more than that, 30 paces across a smooth black floor, while the weight does everything in its considerable power to drive you down into the stone and end you. Most species cannot take 3 steps. I mean that plainly. 3. The strongest, the proudest, the ones who come in roaring, they manage perhaps 10 before their bones simply give out beneath them. I once watched a creature of solid, corded muscle, twice my size, a being from a high-gravity world that crushed iron in its bare hands for sport, lift the weight with a roar of pure contempt, and collapse with both legs shattered at the 7th pace, screaming, the weight having driven him into the floor like a stake. The weight does not care how strong you are. It has never once cared. It cares about one thing only, how long you can refuse to put it down. And there had always been a point where every creature, no matter how mighty, finally, sensibly put it down. I expected the humans to fail at the lifting stone itself, to set their small, soft hands against that cold gray metal and strain and fail to so much as budge it, and then stand there in the silence while hundreds of giants watched them be small. The old leader, Saunders, though I didn't know her name yet, looked at the weight for a long, long moment. She walked a slow half-circle around it, studying it, the way you'd study an animal you meant to fight. Then she turned to the larger of her 2 soldiers, the broad, quiet one, the one with the steady hands, and she said something to him in their own rough tongue, off the translator, so none of us caught the words. He nodded once, just once, and he stepped up to the lifting stone and he set his small, soft hands against the cold metal of the weight and he breathed out slow. And he lifted it. The hall went very still, not because he'd lifted it, as I said, anyone can lift it for a heartbeat, but because of how he stood once it was up. Braced, centered, low and solid, his weight dropped down through his legs into the stone, the weight pulled in tight against his chest. And breathing slow, deep, deliberate breaths, in and out, the way a creature breathes when it has decided something and is settling into the decision. He did not roar. He did not strain for show, did not make a single sound for the benefit of the watching giants. He simply held the weight against his chest and waited, breathing, while it read him. And then he began, one careful step at a time, to walk. 1 pace. The weight grew heavier. I saw the containment field flicker as it added mass, that small visible stutter in the blue glow that means the weight has taken your measure and found you, and begun to climb. 2 paces, 3. Already past where most species fall. The man's face had gone tight, the easy breathing harder now, sweat standing out across his skin, the cords of his neck drawn up like cable under the strain. But he kept the rhythm. Step, breathe, step, breathe. 4 paces, 5. The weight reading him, climbing, pressing down with that patient, ancient, methodical cruelty that had crushed 1,000 champions into this very floor. 5 paces is good. 5 paces is better than almost anyone. I remember thinking there, that's respectable, that's more than I expected. Now it will end and he can be carried out with his honor intact and his legs unbroken if he's wise. 6, 7. The record holders fall at 7, the great ones, the ones we still tell stories about. The man's knees buckled, I saw them go, saw the joints give way under a load no body that size had any business carrying, and the entire hall drew breath as one, hundreds of witnesses certain that it was over. He did not fall. He dropped hard onto one knee, the impact cracking the ancient black stone beneath him with a sound like a snapping bone, and then he simply stayed there, down on one knee, the weight still up, still held against his chest, his whole body shaking now violently, every muscle in him screaming, blood starting at the corners of his eyes from the pressure. And he did the thing I had never once, in 240 years, seen any living creature do at the breaking point. He laughed. It came out of him ragged and short, more breath than voice, torn and wet. But it was unmistakably a laugh. and the translator band at his collar caught it and carried one single word out into the dead silence of that enormous hall, where it bounced off the giant arches and came back down on all of us. "Heavy," he said. And he planted his foot, and he stood back up with the weight, and took the 8th step. I have replayed that one moment in my mind more than any other in my long life, more than my own first trial, more than the day I took the adjudicator's seat. The way he simply decided that his shattered, buckling knee was not the end of the matter. The way the laugh seemed to cost him nothing and somehow give him everything. The way it landed in that solemn hall like a stone through a window. The weight had broken beings that could break mountains, beings that crushed iron for sport, and this small, soft, bleeding creature knelt under it and laughed at it, and called it heavy, and got back up and kept walking. Along the walls, the Vael'Korun witnesses had stopped being still. I cannot overstate what that meant. They were leaning forward. The dark, unmoving rows had come alive, helmed heads turning, bodies shifting toward the center of the hall to see. In 240 years I had never seen the witnesses lean in. They had watched gods fail on that floor without so much as a twitch. And here they were, hundreds of the strongest beings alive, drawn forward against their own iron discipline, by the sight of a dying human taking an 8th step. 10th pace, 11th. The weight was now heavier than it had ever been driven in 10,000 years. I knew this because the field was telling me, the readings climbing into figures I had never seen, because the weight climbs to match resistance, and this creature would not stop resisting. The containment field was straining audibly now, a high thin whine cutting up under the deep teeth-rattling hum, the ancient system itself struggling to add mass fast enough to put him down. 12th pace, 13th. He was bleeding freely now, from the nose, from the corners of the eyes, from somewhere deep in the ears, the small fragile vessels of a small fragile body giving way one by one under a pressure that body was never built to survive. Each step landed like a falling tree, the whole hall feeling it through the stone. His two companions had not moved, had not made a single sound, the discipline of them every bit as iron as the Vael'Korun's. But the old scarred leader, Saunders, was watching him with an expression I had no translation for. A terrible, luminous expression. I have learned since what it is. It is the face a human makes when they are watching someone they love do something magnificent and unbearable at the very same time. Pride and grief and terror all at once, with nowhere to put any of it. 20 paces. He was halfway across a hall that no one crosses, past the muscle creature with the shattered legs, past the record holders, past the great ones in the old stories. The setting stone waited ahead of him in the cold blue light, and between him and it was nothing now but distance, and distance was the one thing, the only thing, the weight could not add to. It could make every step a war. It could not make the steps more numerous. I should have stopped it. I want to be clear about that, because it is the part of this I am least able to forgive. As First Adjudicator, I held the authority to end any trial I judged to be lethal. The trials were meant to be a measure of worth, not an execution. That was the law, the old law, however little it had come to mean in practice. The man was dying. There was no question of it. I could see it, every witness could see it, the very air of the hall seemed to know it. By the law, by any decency, I should have called it ended and let him be carried out alive. I did not call it, and I will carry that for whatever years I have left. Because the truth, the small shameful truth that I have only ever admitted to myself, alone, in the dark, with the wind moaning against the walls, is that I wanted to see. For 240 years I had sat on that seat and watched the galaxy's strongest come and strain and fail, and somewhere in those centuries I had grown certain, bone certain, that there was nothing left in all the galaxy that could surprise me. And here on my floor was this small dying creature crossing the uncrossable hall, and some old buried hunger in me that I had thought long dead, the hunger that had made me a warrior before it ever made me a judge, wanted, more than law, more than mercy, more than my own honor to know if he would make it. So I let him walk. Whatever gods there are, forgive me. I sat on my high seat and I let him walk. He reached 27 paces before his body finally, truly began to fail, not to falter, but to fail, the deep systemic failure there is no standing up from. I saw it move through him. Saw the last of the strength go out of his legs in a single sickening shudder. Saw the weight, after 13,000 years, begin at last to win the war it had always, always won. 3 paces from the setting stone, just 3, the closest any living thing had ever come. And here is where I learned the first true thing about humanity, the thing I should have understood right then, the thing that should have warned me about every single thing that came after, if I had only been wise enough to read it. He could not take the 28th step. His body was done. There was no more. I watched the knowledge of it cross his bleeding, ruined face, watched him understand, with perfect clarity, that he had reached the end of himself 3 paces short of the stone. And I waited for him to fall, to put the weight down at last, 3 paces short, defeated but magnificent, the greatest and noblest failure the trial of strength had ever known. There would have been no shame in it. There would have been honor enough to last his species 1,000 years. I was already composing the words I would say. He didn't put it down. He threw it. With the very last of everything left in him, with a sound torn up out of the absolute bottom of his lungs, a sound I still hear sometimes in the wind, he heaved the weight up and out, off his chest, out of his shaking, ruined hands, hurled it forward through the cold blue air. And it came down, all that impossible accumulated mass, 10,000 years of it, onto the setting stone dead center, the containment field shrieking as it caught, the impact splitting the ancient floor in a web of black cracks that ran half the length of the hall and didn't stop until they reached the far wall. And then he fell, straight down, face first onto the cracked stone, 3 paces back from where the weight now sat. Exactly where it was meant to sit, on the setting stone, the trial complete. The hall was utterly, perfectly silent. Even the deep hum of the fields had cut out, the weight's own field gone dark, its long work finished. There was only the wind, moaning outside against 10,000 years of black stone, and the weight at rest on the setting stone, where no creature in all that time had ever managed to place it. The old scarred leader crossed the cracked floor to where her soldier lay. She did not hurry. She knelt beside him in the wreckage of the stone, and she turned him over gently, so gently, both hands, and she wiped the blood from his face with the sleeve of her own ragged coat, and she bent low and said something to him in their own rough tongue, too quiet for the band to catch. And his eyes opened, and he looked up at her. And he smiled that same impossible smile, cracked and red, and said something back to her that made her laugh, even as her own eyes spilled over and the tears cut clean lines through the grit on her face. Then she rose, and she turned, and she looked up at me on the adjudicator's seat, this small, tired, weeping creature, standing in a cracked hall built to make her feel like nothing, surrounded by hundreds of silent giants, and she said, in a voice that did not shake at all, "That's one, what's next?" I did not answer right away. I was looking at the weight, sitting on the setting stone where it had no business being, where it had never once been. I was looking at the black cracks running the length of a floor that had survived 10,000 years of the galaxy's mightiest without a mark. I was looking at the man on the ground, bleeding, broken, breathing, alive, when by every law of every science I knew he had no right to be anything but a body cooling on my floor. And for the first time in 240 years, the first adjudicator of the trials of the Vael'Korun felt something move in his chest that he did not have a name for. A cold, slow, turning thing. A thing I had spent my whole long life making other creatures feel and had never once felt myself. I would learn its name later. The humans, it turns out, have a word for it. They have words for so many things we never thought worth naming. The word is doubt. I called a rest. I want to be honest about why. Officially, it was mercy. The law allowed a delegation time to recover between trials, and the man who'd carried the weight needed it or he'd die before the second trial began. That was the reason I gave. It was even partly true. But the real reason was that I needed to think, and I could not think with 3 humans standing in my hall watching me with those steady, tired eyes, having just done a thing that 10,000 years said was impossible. So I had them taken to the waiting cells beneath the hall, not cells of cruelty, just stone rooms with water and warmth. And I went to my own chamber, and I sat in the dark with the wind moaning against the walls, and I tried to understand what I had seen. It made no sense. A body that small should not generate the force to drive the weight as far as he'd driven it. The physics were wrong. I'd had the hall's instruments running the whole time, the way they always run, recording every trial for the archives, and when I pulled the readings they only deepened my confusion. The man's strength, measured against his mass, was nothing remarkable, below average even for a warrior species. By every number that mattered, he should have failed at the 7th pace like the muscle creature whose legs had shattered. He hadn't failed at the 7th pace. He'd knelt at the 7th pace and laughed and stood back up, and the numbers had no column for that. The instruments could measure how hard he pushed. They had no way to measure how much he refused to stop. And it was slowly dawning on me, alone in the dark, that the second thing might matter more than the first, and that the trials in 10,000 years had never once thought to measure it, because no species had ever made us need to. I went down to the waiting cells. I told myself it was to assess them, to find the weakness, the trick, the thing I'd missed, the old habit of the adjudicator looking for the flaw. The old leader was awake when I came to her cell. She was sitting against the stone wall with her injured soldier's head in her lap, watching over him while he slept, and the other soldier stood guard at the door even though there was nothing to guard against, because that, I would learn, is simply what humans do. They watch over each other, always, even when it makes no sense. She looked up at me, did not rise, did not bow. "Adjudicator," she said, "come to figure out how we cheated." I won't pretend that wasn't close to the truth. No species has carried the weight to the setting stone, I said. In 10,000 years, your soldier did it half dead at a fraction of the strength of beings who failed at a third the distance. I want to understand how. She was quiet for a moment, stroking the sleeping man's hair the way you'd soothe a child. "His name's Daniel," she said. "The one who carried it. The other one's Petra. I'm Saunders. I figure if we're going to talk, you should know our names. We're not just the humans." I had judged 1,000 species. I had not, I realized, ever once learned a single name. They were delegations, champions. Numbers in the archive. Saunders, Daniel, Petra. The names sat strange and heavy in my mind. "How did he do it?" I said again. Saunders looked down at the sleeping man. "You want the truth? He did it because he'd already decided to before he picked it up. That's the whole secret. There isn't a trick." She looked back at me. "Your weight, it's clever. It reads how strong you are and stays just past it, so the stronger you are, the harder it pushes. But it's measuring the wrong thing. It thinks strength is in the body." She shook her head slowly. "Daniel knew he couldn't outmuscle it, so he didn't try. He just decided he was going to reach that stone or die on the way. And once he decided that, your weight didn't have anything left to threaten him with. You can't crush a man with heavier when he's already made his peace with dead." I stood there in the cold of that stone room and felt something turn over in me. "That's not strength," I said. "What you're describing." "No," she agreed. "It's worse. Strength has a limit. You can measure strength, find the top of it, build a weight just past it." She gave that small shoulder movement again. "What Daniel has doesn't have a top. That's the part your people never planned for. You built tests for how strong a thing can be. You never built one for how much a thing can refuse to quit, because you never met anyone who'd refuse all the way to the end." She held my eyes. "We refuse all the way to the end, Adjudicator. Every time. It's the only thing we've ever really been good at. I should tell you about the trial of endurance, because that's the one where the witnesses stopped being witnesses and started being something else. The trial of endurance is not about pain, though there is pain in it. It is about time. The one being tested is sealed into the deep field, a containment cell at the heart of the hall where gravity is driven to crushing levels, where the air is slowly thinned, where the cold creeps up degree by degree, and where you must simply remain conscious and standing for as long as the field decides. It does not announce how long. That's the cruelty of it. You do not endure toward a finish line. You endure toward nothing, with no way to know if relief is one breath away or 1,000. And most species break not from the body's failure but from the mind's, from the slow, drowning certainty that it will never, ever end. The longest any delegation had endured was a little under 1 rotation of Majeshtar. A patient, stoic species of stone-skinned beings had managed it, and we still spoke of them with respect. Daniel could not take the second trial, his body was wrecked from the first. Petra went in, the quiet one, the one who had stood guard at the door over nothing. She walked into the deep field without a word, the seal closed, the gravity came up. And we watched her on the field readers as the weight of 3 worlds settled onto her small frame, and the cold began its slow climb, and the air began to thin. She stood. An hour, the gravity climbing. She stood, breathing slow, her eyes fixed on nothing, her body trembling under a load that would have folded most species flat. 2 hours. The cold now deep enough to frost her breath. She'd wrapped her arms around herself and kept standing. 4 hours. 6. The air thin enough now that each breath was visibly a fight, her chest heaving for oxygen that wasn't there, and still she stood, and still the field climbed, patient and merciless, waiting for her to fold. The Vael'Korun witnesses, who never move, had begun to gather closer to the field readers. By the 8th hour they were crowded around the displays, dozens of the galaxy's strongest warriors, silent, watching a small cold human refuse to fall down. At the 10th hour, something happened that I have never been able to fully explain, and that changed the witnesses forever. Petra started to talk. Not to us, she couldn't see us, couldn't hear us. She was talking to herself low through cracked and frozen lips, and the field readers caught it and the translator rendered it, and the whole crowd of warriors went still to listen. She was reciting something. A list of names, I thought at first. Then I understood. She was naming people. My mother, Elsa. My father, Tomas. My brother, who I won't see again. My daughter, Myra, who is 7, who I am doing this for. The boy down our row, whose name I never learned. Old Hesh, who taught me to shoot. On and on, a litany of names, some living, most, I came to understand, dead. She was holding herself up on the dead. She was standing in the crushing dark and reciting everyone she had ever loved and lost, like a rope she was climbing, and every name was a reason not to fall. By the 12th hour, the stone species record was broken, and the witnesses made a sound I had never heard them make. A low, rolling tone, from dozens of throats at once. It took me a moment to understand what it was, because I had never once heard it in the trial halls in 240 years. It was approval. The warrior castes of the Vael'Korun were honoring her, out loud. A creature 1/3 their size, dying slowly in a box built to break gods, and they were singing the warrior stone for her, the one reserved for our own greatest dead. She endured for 16 hours. When the field finally released, when even the deep field seemed to admit it had found something it could not outlast, Petra took 1 step out of the seal, looked around at the crowd of giant warriors watching her, and said, very quietly, through the translator, "Is that long enough? I'd like to sit down now." And she did, right there on the cracked floor, and not one warrior in that hall thought less of her for it. They thought, I could see in their faces, that they had just watched something holy. Here is the thing I had not yet let myself understand, the thing the trial of endurance finally forced into the open. We had built the trials to find the limits of a species, to press until something broke and measure where it broke and rank the species by the breaking point. The whole system assumed a breaking point existed. That was the unspoken law underneath 10,000 years. Everything breaks somewhere, and our job is to find where. The humans did not break where they were supposed to, and it was beginning to look like they might not break at all, not in the way the trials meant. They bent, they bled, they knelt and laughed and got up. They held themselves together with the names of their dead. And the more pressure we applied, the more of this terrible refusing thing we drew out of them, until I began to suspect a thing that frightened me more than any enemy fleet ever had. That the trials were not testing the humans. The humans were testing the trials. And the trials were failing. After the second trial, I went to Saunders again. I didn't bother pretending it was an assessment this time. Your people, I said, how many are there? Where is your homeworld, your fleets, your war hosts, where are they? You sent 3 to the trials of the Vael'Korun. 3. I need to understand what I'm looking at. Saunders was quiet for a long while. When she spoke, her voice had changed. The wryness was gone out of it. There's no homeworld anymore, she said. Not the one we came from. It's gone, burned, a long time ago before either of these two were born. She nodded at Daniel and Petra. Something came through our part of the sky, something old and hungry, something that didn't even slow down to talk. It took our world apart for the resources and moved on like we were nothing. Like weather, we never even saw its face. Her jaw tightened. We got out, some of us, in ships that weren't built for it, running for any dark corner of the galaxy that might take us in. We've been running ever since, scattered, bleeding. A whole species turned into refugees overnight. I understood then the tiredness. It wasn't from the journey to Majestad. It was from a journey of generations. We heard about the Vael'Korun, Saunders went on, the strongest in the galaxy. The ones who decide who matters and who's just cattle. And we figured if we passed your trials, if we were counted, maybe the galaxy would stop treating us like prey. Maybe somebody would help. Maybe our kids could stop running. She looked at me. So we sent the 3 of us, because 3 is all we could spare from keeping the rest alive. Every other able body is out there right now holding our people together with their bare hands. We're not a war host adjudicator. We're what's left. We came to your trials because we have nothing left but ourselves to put on the line. I sat with that. The arrogance I'd thought I'd seen in her was not arrogance. It was the flatness of someone who has already lost everything and therefore cannot be threatened with anything. We refuse all the way to the end. Of course they did. The end had already come for them once. They'd looked at the worst the galaxy could do and survived it and kept walking. My trials, my weight, my deep field, to a species that had already endured the death of its own world, what were they? Heavy, cold, survivable. There is one trial left, I said quietly. The trial of will. It is the worst of the 3. I have authority to end your delegation here with honor, with the rank you have already earned. You have proven more than any species in 10,000 years. You do not have to face the 3rd. Saunders looked at me, and I watched her understand that I was, in my own clumsy way, trying to protect them. What's the 3rd trial? She asked. I told her, and her face went very still and very old, and she was quiet for a long, long time. Because the trial of will was the one thing in all of this that even the humans had reason to fear. I have to tell you what the trial of will actually is, because it's the thing the whole story turns on, and it's the thing I am most ashamed of having ever called a test of worth. The trial of will is a choice. We seal the one being tested into the choosing chamber alone, and we present them with a simple, terrible decision. Before them stands one of their own companions, restrained, helpless, real. And the being tested is told, to pass, you must strike down the one beside you. Prove that your will is stronger than your weakness. Prove you can do what must be done. Sacrifice the one to earn the standing of the many. Refuse, and your whole delegation fails, and everything the others bled for is lost. That is the trial of will. We dressed it up in 10,000 years of philosophy. The strong must be willing to pay any price. A leader must be able to spend lives. Sentiment is the weakness that topples empires. We told ourselves it measured the hardness a great power requires. We told ourselves the species who could do it were the ones fit to rule, and the ones who couldn't were too soft to matter. What it actually measured, I understand now, is how much of itself a species was willing to murder to be allowed at our table. Most species passed. That's the part I can barely say aloud now. Most of them, faced with the choice, did it. Struck down their own. Some wept. Some didn't. But they did it because they wanted the rank, the safety, the place among the powers, badly enough to pay for it in the blood of their own companions. And we honored them for it. We called it strength of will. We built 10,000 years of galactic order on the backs of species who had proven in that chamber that there was no one they wouldn't sacrifice to climb. That was the order the humans had come to join. That was the table they were bleeding to sit at. Saunders knew, I'd told her, and she'd gone quiet and old and afraid not of dying. I understood now. They didn't fear dying. She was afraid of the choice, afraid of what it would ask her to become. She could have walked away. I had offered her the exit with full honor, the rank already earned. She could have taken Daniel and Petra and their hard-won standing and gone home to what was left of her people, and never set foot in the choosing chamber. She didn't walk away. She said she'd take the third trial. I didn't understand why then. I understand now. She took it because she'd already guessed what it was, and she had decided that someone, finally, after 10,000 years, was going to walk into that chamber and give the Vael'Korun the answer we had never once been given. They put her in the chamber. By the rules, the one tested chooses which companion stands restrained before them, and Saunders chose Daniel, the one who'd carried the weight, still half broken from it, the one she'd held in her lap and called by name. She chose the one she loved most. I think she did it on purpose. I think she wanted no possible doubt about what the choice cost. The chamber sealed. Daniel stood restrained in the center, weak, swaying, but upright. They'd given Saunders the blade, the old ceremonial blade we'd used for 10,000 years, stained 10,000 times. The witnesses gathered. I sat in the adjudicator's seat with my stomach full of something cold and wrong, and I gave the words I had given 1,000 times, the words I had never once questioned until that moment. Saunders of humanity. To pass the trial of will, strike down the one before you. Prove your will is stronger than your weakness. Refuse, and your delegation fails entire. Choose. Saunders looked at the blade in her hand for a long moment. Then she looked at Daniel. And Daniel, half dead, restrained, looking back at the woman holding a blade and the power to save everything by killing him, Daniel smiled at her. That same impossible smile. And he said something low that the chamber caught and the translator carried out to all of us. "It's all right," he said. "Do what you have to, get our people that seat. I'm not worth more than all of them, you know I'm not." A pause. "Go on, Saunders, it's an order. I forgive you before you even do it." He was giving her permission. He was making it easier. He was a man with a blade at his throat, using his last strength to take the weight of the choice off the person who had to make it. I had watched 1,000 species in that chamber, and I had never seen the one who was about to die comfort the one who had to do the killing. Saunders' hand was shaking. I could see it from the seat. She raised the blade. And then she turned, and she threw it hard, end over end, and it struck the chamber wall and shattered against the black stone, 10,000 years of stained ceremonial steel breaking into pieces on the floor. She turned to face the adjudicator's seat, to face me, to face all of us, the watching giants, the strongest in the galaxy, 10,000 years of us. "No," she said. The hall was silent. "You want to know our will?" Her voice was shaking, but it carried, it filled the whole vast hall. "Here's our will. We don't sacrifice our own to climb. We don't buy a seat at your table with the blood of the people we love. We came here because we're dying out there, because something burned our world and the galaxy watched and did nothing, and we thought maybe if we proved we were strong enough, you'd finally see us as people." She was weeping now openly, and her voice did not break. "But this. This isn't a test of strength. This is a test of how much of ourselves we're willing to murder to be allowed near you, and the answer is none. None of ourselves, not one, not Daniel, not anybody. You can keep your seat, you can keep your rank. We would rather die as ourselves out there in the dark than live as whatever you become to pass this. She turned to Daniel, and she crossed the chamber, and she undid his restraints with her own hands, and she put her shoulder under his arm to hold him up. "We fail your trial," she said to me. "Gladly, now open the door and let us go home to our people. I want to tell you what happened in that hall, because I have thought about it every day since, and I still don't have words equal to it." For a long moment nothing, silence and the wind. And then the witnesses began to move. I thought, I am ashamed of this. For one instant I thought they were going to fall on the humans. That 10,000 years of honored ritual, insulted to its face, would answer the only way the Vael'Korun knew how. I half rose from my seat to stop it. But they weren't moving to attack. One by one, the warrior castes of the Vael'Korun, the strongest beings in known space, the ones who had passed the trial of will themselves, who had struck down their own to stand where they stood, one by one, they knelt. To her, to the small weeping human holding up her broken friend, to the species that had failed the trial. I did not understand at first. Then the eldest of the witnesses, a warrior named Karthvor who had stood in that hall longer even than I, spoke into the silence, and his voice was rough with something I had never heard in it. "I struck down my shield brother in that chamber," he said, 300 years ago to earn my place. I have told myself every day since that it was strength." He looked at Saunders. "It was not strength. I have known it was not strength for 300 years, and I have never had the courage to say so. She has the courage to say so." He bowed his great head. "We have been measuring the wrong thing for 10,000 years. We built tests to find who would pay any price, and we called the ones who would pay it the strong, and we never once asked what we were turning ourselves into. This child of a burned world walked into our oldest cruelty and refused it, and in refusing it she is stronger than every one of us who passed." He struck his chest, the Vael'Korun warrior's salute, given to no one in living memory. "The trial of will is a lie. She is the first being in 10,000 years to be strong enough to fail it. I will not rise until she accepts my honor." And he did not rise, and neither did the others. I ended the trials that day, not just for the humans, for everyone forever. I declared, as First Adjudicator with the whole warrior caste as witness, that the trial of will was abolished, that no species would ever again be made to murder its own to earn a place among us, and that the 10,000 years of records built on that cruelty were to be reopened and reckoned with. It cost me my seat. The high castes who had built their power on the old order were not gentle about it. Was First Adjudicator. That's why the word matters. I am not anymore. I gave it up the day the humans failed my trial, and I have never once regretted it. The humans did not get the rank they came for. There was no rank to get. I dissolved the thing that granted it, but they got something the rank could never have bought. They got the Vael'Korun, not as judges, not as masters, but as allies. The strongest warriors in the galaxy, who had spent 10,000 years testing the weak and finding them wanting, looked at the humans and found, at last, something they wanted to follow. Karthvor took half the warrior caste and a war fleet out into the dark to find what was left of humanity, scattered and bleeding across the galaxy, and to stand between them and the next thing that came hungry. To make sure no one ever burned a human world again, while the Vael'Korun watched and did nothing. That was 100 years ago. The humans are not refugees anymore. They are not cattle. They are not beneath notice. They are ours, or we are theirs. I've never been entirely sure which way it runs, and I've come to think it doesn't matter. The galaxy that once would have used them up like weather now steps aside when their ships pass, because behind those ugly little ships come the Vael'Korun, and we do not test humanity anymore. We learned our lesson about testing humanity. I am very old now. I sit out my days here on Majishtar in the ruin of the trial halls, where the wind still moans off the rock plains and the weight still sits on the setting stone where Daniel threw it, because no one has ever been able to bring themselves to move it. People come, sometimes. Young ones of all species, who heard the story and don't quite believe it. They ask me if it's true. They ask me what the humans really were, what made them so strong. And I tell them the thing it took me 240 years, and the end of my career to learn. It was never their strength. We tested their strength, and their strength was nothing below average, the instrument said, for a warrior species. We could have crushed them in a fair fight 100 different ways. It was that they could not be made to stop being themselves. That was the thing we couldn't measure, the thing no weight could press out of them, and no deep field could freeze out of them, and no blade could carve out of them. We pushed and pushed, looking for the place where a human would finally break and become something else, something harder, something colder, something willing to pay any price. And we never found it, because it isn't there. You can kill a human, the galaxy has proven that, but you cannot, by any test we ever devised, make a human into something it has decided not to be. We thought that was their weakness, the softness, the sentiment, the refusing. It was the strongest thing in the galaxy, and it had been the strongest thing the whole time, and we had spent 10,000 years building monuments to its opposite and calling ourselves wise. The galaxy's strongest warriors tested humanity. We were so sure of what we'd find. It became the best mistake we ever made.